سلام و درود میفرستم خدمت تمامی عزیزان و گرانقدران و خیلی خوشبختم از اینکه مجدداً این افتخار رو دارم که با لایو دیگه‌ای در خدمت شما بزرگان و عزیزان باشم و خوشحال باشم از اینکه میتونیم یک لایو رو داشته باشیم و این لایو بتونه به همه ما کمک بکنه. I really appreciate all our audiences in order to join us, and we are really happy to host dear Carolyn Childs to join our live talk in order to talk about the important issues during such a lockdown in COVID-19 era. Business issues, marketing, branding, working with influencers, how to find and use evidences. And these are the most important issues that we are supposed to cover today. And I'm sure that all the audiences will enjoy from Carolyn's responses. So I'm just going to invite Carolyn because I see that Carolyn is available now. I'm not going to for having Carolyn here in our tourism live talk. Carolyn, we're waiting to have you here, and we're waiting. Yeah, how are you, Carolyn?
I'm very good, and it's great to chat to you, Mohammed. As you say, it's a pretty tricky time, but I hope all of you who are based in Iran and are on your fast will forgive me. I'm past sundown, so my cup of tea is now allowed.
No, it's okay. You can take your cup of tea because this live talk is their cup of tea as they've joined it. So it's okay. So it's okay as you have you here all. So I really appreciate you. Wow, such a background with, wow, so many fruitful books I see, and it's great. Caroline, I really appreciate you because I know that in the morning you've passed a very tough webinar by the World Tourism Association of Culture and Heritage and Low Season Traveler, dear Chris and dear Ged, who were both my speaker here, and now I have the honor to have you here in order to share ideas over the topic of business issues, marketing, working with influencers. I know that it's a broad issue, but I'm sure that we can cover it all through each details. At the beginning, let me give you a brief about Tourism Live Talk. It usually takes around 1 hour 30 to 2 hours, sometimes less, sometimes more. The point is here that our followers are from Minister of Tourism, are from President of Tourism Commission of Chambers of Commerce, travel agents, tour operators, travel associations in Iran, hotel managers, and also aviation clubs who join us. At the beginning of the live talks around 3 months ago, we had just Iranian audiences, but nowadays, as I see here, from America, from Canada, from Spain, from Brisbane, Australia, and London, we have audiences who have joined us. So in that case, it becomes a very international live talk. I should tell you that as you see comments here, causes not to have your visual good. So I'm just going to turn comments off. This is the first issue.
That's much better. I feel slightly less intimidated now, Mohammed.
Yeah, that's okay. And the second issue is that we dedicate a very specific time to our audiences in order to ask their questions from you. So audiences know that they have the possibility in order to send their questions, comments, queries into the question box that I have here, and I'm managing it. And I'm reviewing and I'm reading it while we are having our communication. So we dedicate a very specific time, but we will share with each other when the suitable time is in order to talk about all those issues. Another point is here that Instagram will automatically put an end into our live talk after an hour. So with a prior notice, I will put an end into our live talk, and we will come back to our live talk for a second episode of this live talk with Carolyn Childs, which is our honor. Caroline, let me ask you the first issue. Who is Caroline?
That's probably the toughest question you're going to ask me, Mohammed, because we're all different people in different circumstances, aren't we? So today I'm here talking to you as the CEO of mytravelresearch.com, as somebody who looks at trends and at the future. So that's one me. And that me's been around for about 30 odd years. I had a very auspicious start date in travel. For your Chinese members will love my start date in working in travel and tourism, as it was the 8th of the 8th, 1988, which is, there is no more fortuitous date in Chinese. But in my private life, I'm a cultural adventurer. I love to do cultural adventure experiences. I love to do nature. Earlier this year, I was very privileged to go to Ethiopia, and I'd have a mixture of the two. So go hiking in the Simeon Highlands and then visit World Heritage Sites in Lalibela in the Danakil Depression. I'm one of 5 children, and most of my family, I am what my friend of mine calls a posse, which is an Australian who was born in the UK, and Australians call people who were born in the UK POMs. So when you put that together, we are posies. So I'm all of those people. I've worked on the airline side of tourism. Most of my work today is much more working with tourism boards, but particularly often with small businesses and local tourism boards. So hopefully that's a little bit of the sense of Carolyn in a nutshell.
Great, thank you. Carolyn, we can call Carolyn as a researcher or as a futurist?
Good question. He asked the best questions. There are no bad questions when you're a researcher. The secret to that, Mohammed, is we'll both give you very similar answers, but you'll pay a futurist more money than you'll pay a researcher. So when I worked that out, I pivoted my title out of being a researcher to being a futurist, because I realized I came to a conference in Australia, Tourism Australia conference here in where I'm based. It was a 3-hour drive from me from Canberra, and they'd flown somebody in first class from the UK who was called a futurist. And I listened to every answer he gave, and I didn't hear one single answer that I couldn't have given. So, you know what, when the evidence points to you, I'm like, okay, so if I tell people I'm a futurist, they'll pay me more, which means they appreciate more of what I'm doing. And actually, that thinking about the future and looking at how we can understand evidence to shape the future was what we were doing already. So we're not lying to people, we're just representing what we do in the best possible light. So you could say it's actually marketing.
Great, 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 great. As we are supposed to go into details about the questions that I have here, before that, I think we need to talk about some important issues. After that, we need to talk about brand. Yes. But about the brand, I'm not going to go into whole generation talk. I just want to say, Carolyn, when we talk about brand, it means brand identity, it means brand image, it means brand equity, and it means brand resilience. I want you to give us your idea on the basis of these 4 issues that I've told you.
Brand equity, brand resilience, it's a memory test.
Brand image and brand identity.
Okay, well, I think before we break them down, Mohammed, what I'd like to do is say that the important thing about a brand is that they're all interconnected, so that all parts of the same thing. And often we get very hung up on the bits. So, you know, I literally, because as I said, I work with very many small destinations, they'll often think that their logo is their brand. A logo is just an asset of your brand. It's part of your brand identity. It's a very important part. It's something that you use to create memory with your target audiences. But to me, your image, your identity are really what's the core of it and what's the most important, because that's actually the part that builds resilience. Because that is the essence of who you are and what you're about. And you can argue about whether brands and people are similar, but I think if you think about that, if you think about a brand as a living thing, as a system, and almost as a person, then you think about all of those aspects. So as I said, I am somebody who's been talking about and thinking about travel and the future of travel for 30 years, but I'm also the daughter of a mother who's in lockdown in the UK now. I'm a rower. I'm a member of a rowing crew. So all of those bits, and you have to think about that whole thing when you're thinking about the brand, and think about which bits of those you need to dial up to do certain things or think about, and which bits that are just there and in the background. But that integrated thinking, the best brands in the world, many of which are not in tourism, incidentally, the best brands in the world have that very integrated sense of who they are and what they are. And it's not even at this kind of conscious head level. It's very much in their hearts and in their fiber of their being. They know who they are and what they're there for. So, for example, when I worked at IATA, we knew what we were there to do for the industry. It was absolutely fused into who we were. But it wasn't fused into who we were by accident. We spent a lot of time talking about that, debating it. I had a little tiny card on the pin-up wall of my desk that told me what we were there to do and reminded me of that. So I think we build that in, and that's where the resilience comes in. The other side to resilience is knowing how to change over time and how to adapt over time. So that there's a core of you that's always the same, that DNA of the brand, but how you express it under certain circumstances, how you evolve it as things change for you, I think is a very good example. And I think rather than one brand, a stable of brands, I would say, who've done that really well is Unilever, the consumer goods brands, because they were just making things, but they looked at themselves and what they were doing in the world, and they realized that our world is changing, and that if they wanted to stay relevant for consumers' lives, they needed to change and rethink about how they stayed themselves in that changing world. So absolutely every single one of their I think they've got 30 or 50 brands, has a purpose. So it's that purpose that gives you resilience, and that listening to and responding to the circumstances around you that gives you resilience, which of course is absolutely vital for anybody who is in, whether you're a government tourism board or you're somebody who drives a tour bus to one of your amazing heritage attractions wherever you are in the world, or your beautiful nature or your vibrant cities. That vibrancy, that resilience is what will take us through probably the darkest hour we've had in tourism since World War II at the very least.
Yeah, very good. So as you said, the logo or the name of the company that we say is a baby who is toddling, but it's important to see what the DNA of that baby is.
Yes, yes, yes. And having good ancestry, but also just as we are both nature, who our parents created us, we're also how we nurture and care for our brands. And often people will say, oh, I need to put that from one side when times are tough. Absolutely not. At times like this, we've been told we should take as much exercise as we can. We should eat well. Well, that's true for your brand as well. You should give your brand a healthy diet right now, and you should be making sure that you exercise and use your brand, and you put everything through the filter of your brand. And I can think of a very good example of why that's important, if I could share that with you and your listeners, Mohammed, which is, I think you mentioned some of your listeners may have different access to YouTube, but there is currently a wonderful YouTube video out called All COVID-19 Ads Look the Same. And it's by somebody called Microsoft Sam. We don't actually know who Microsoft Sam is, but it basically, it tells you in the bottom left-hand corner who the brand is. But if you cover that up, there's probably only one brand in that clutter of about 10 ads that you could tell who it was. Because it starts with empty streets, wind blowing down the streets. Then you see pictures of, very relaxed and clean, scrubbed up looking health workers. It shows us all coming together. It shows us all nesting down, and it says, we're here for you. We're here to help you. But they all look the same. The only one you'd be able to tell is different is FedEx. And that's because there's a big plane in the background that says FedEx. So that to me is, at a time like this when we're trying to connect with consumers, yes, we have to recognize we're in the time of COVID-19, but we also have to talk with our own voice and make that authentic connection. Otherwise, we're just wallpaper. And not even such interesting wallpaper as you have behind you, Mohammed.
Great. But the point is here that most of the times when we talk about brands, we think that we're talking about gigantic companies that we cannot even reach them. Sometimes a company could be a small one, but could be a brand. And those companies nowadays, during COVID-19 era, they're facing huge problems. And they not only think about their brands, but also they think about, keep themselves alive. This is another issue. And this is when we come into a question of marketing. We know that finally we should sail, but the point is here that we cannot sail now. Carolyn,
Okay. Well,
should we be marketing? Go on.
No, continue, Mohammed.
Yeah, I'll just give you to come into this question. Should we be marketing during a pandemic? Isn't it a bit insensitive?
Is keeping your employees in a job in the long term, is making sure that economies can recover from this when we come out, insensitive? I probably, the reason I wanted to start responding before you'd finished, Mohammed, was you referenced, and I think this is a common confusion, marketing and selling are not automatically the same thing. So there's two, if we can probably break it down into two things that we're doing. So one is that longer term building of the brand, and the other is the short term selling. What we know, we now have over 100 years of very, very clever people in very expensive universities and private research companies looking at this question of, should you, in a downturn, in a pandemic, should you be advertising? And the conclusion we've come to is that businesses who either don't survive or come out so hobbled that they have to come down. So firstly, yes, now is absolutely the best time to be staying in touch with your customers. That doesn't mean you should go out always and be selling. You should be balancing. There's a number of ways we can split this up. So the first thing is, probably at least half your time should be doing that longer term brand building right now, is building that emotional connection with the consumer so that they know you already. And then the other side of it is, it's still okay to be selling for the future. It's just how we sell. So it's not should we be marketing, it's how we should be marketing, and also where we should be marketing. That if you've got messages that are out to sell, there are places to do that. That is through your own database lists. It's through paid advertisements, because if you're looking at things like display advertising or Google search ads, automatically you're able to predict that people are searching. So if people are searching and they're looking, you're actually doing them a disservice if you're not there for them. We can talk a little bit about what that might look like and what they should be marketing, but to me, absolutely you should be doing this, but you need to tone it down and think about what that message is. So I said not a generic COVID-19 ad, but definitely something that talks to you about that connection between you and your consumer. It's really, really important, because what do we think about our friends who don't talk to us when times are bad? We think they're not really our friends. Travel, one of the things we know, I was looking earlier at the travel sentiment work that TravelSat, for example, do. And we took a deep, deep nosedive around about the 20th of March globally. So they're tracking this globally. I haven't seen their individual market data. We took a deep, deep dive as we, it emerged in places like Iran, in places like Italy, when it really started to hit Europe, when it wasn't just confined to the Wuhan bubble. But what we saw was within 2 weeks, and it actually went into negative territory. So that negative territory point, you don't sell to people, you just let them know you're there. But within 2 weeks, sentiment was already tracking up. And it's almost back at the level where it was when we were first hearing about COVID-19 as a disease in China, and we were looking at those pictures of the streets in Wuhan going, oh, how terrible for them, before we realized it was us. So people are still thinking about traveling. 40% of Australians are already thinking, we know we won't be able to go anywhere overseas till the end of the year, but 40% of Australians are already thinking about where they're going to travel domestically. 70% of Americans are already thinking about where they want to go in the next 6 months. And 40, even at the height of, you know, when we were seeing 900 deaths a day in Italy, Italians were still searching for where they could go on holiday in September of this year, according to Forward Keys. So we've not lost our taste for travel. And I think one of the things to remember is we're all shut in. Travel, one of the advantages we have as a category is we can bring the outside into people's worlds. We can bring those, I think we won't necessarily be wanting to look at crowded cities, but we might want to be looking at beautiful wide expanses of nature. Tourism Australia, where I'm based, that's a lot of their imagery has been of that, or small and intimate human stories. Now, this is not a human story, this is an animal story. But I think if you said the word Australia to people all around the world, the one thing that they would say next is koala. And we had some very, very bad fires in Australia at the end of last year. And some of koalas were injured. And there's a little hospital in Port Macquarie, which is about 5 hours north of where I live. And they shot and shared video of the koalas who'd been healed going back into the wild. This is a story of resilience and of human connection to nature. And it went absolutely, it even made the cover of Vogue. Now, if you think what it would cost a travel brand to advertise in Vogue at any time in the cycle, and that story connected such that Vogue covered it, then I think you can see that's how we have that communication.
Great, great. As we know, during COVID-19, people have emotionally damaged and suffered. And you gave us a key point that we should make emotional connection with our audiences, passengers, I mean. What that emotional connection mean to you, Caroline?
Mohammed, do you know any famous love poems?
Some.
Can you, in your mind, I'd like everyone to think of a poem about falling in love that they know. And just, if everyone, I mean, I know we're on Instagram and it's a visual medium, but if you could close your eyes and think of that, and you think about falling in love, how do you feel when you fall in love? You know, your body reacts. It's not just an emotional, your heart beats faster, your eyes dilate, your body, you have shivering all over your body when you fall in love. That's what I think of, and that's what we're trying to do. I often say our job with marketing is seduction. We have to be seducing our customers to fall in love with us. And that's what it means to me. And that's why, if you think of it like that, and then think of who you are and who your customer is, you know, lots of unlikely people fall in love, and every couple is different. So you're finding your perfect match. So it isn't about who you are or who your customer is. It's about knowing that you're the right ones for each other, and then bringing that seduction into it. And that's what I want. I always think if we've done our job, if there's a physical reaction, if you feel something so that it feels here in your stomach, or your heart starts to beat, or you know, your body moves. So there's there should be almost like a physical reaction if you've done it really well, even if it's just the smallest tiny smile on your face. And that's what I think we're doing. And that's why stories are the essence of good marketing. And a story doesn't have to be long. It can be a nanosecond. It can be an image that makes that connection and tells a story. In fact, some of the, you know, the great photojournalism of the world, we know that that single image can tell us a whole world. So I think that's what I think of as that emotional connection.
Yeah, when you were giving this speech, I was thinking about my first love, and the one who was my first girlfriend too. That was great, Caroline. That was great. You know, I myself have never taken it like that. I myself have never taken it like that, but your response, put me think about seduction, put me think about, just think about your audiences, your interlocutors, the people who are watching you are supposed to fall in love with you. Thank you, thank you. How should we keep our brand alive or develop the brand resilience?
I think the first thing, and we've touched on this a little bit, you mentioned this in some of your earlier questions, Mohammed, which is that understanding who and what your brand is. At the moment, I'm saying to people 3 things you need to be thinking about. Who is your customer? And again, I find it helpful to think of that customer as a person, because I think it's much easier to talk to a person than to a demographic. In tourism marketing, you read all this stuff about, our target's the over 55 market, women solo travelers, for example. Well, that would include me. But it's very hard to write great marketing copy or select great images or seduce that audience writing to a 55-year-old who likes to take solo travel. So if that is your audience, for example, or your audience is handsome young men who happen to be based in Iran, if you are writing to Mohammed, when you think about that and you build that in, that's how you do it. So that is really how you keep your brand alive. So it's understanding your customer in that personal level, understanding who you are, have that really spend the time. And if you are in shutdown at the moment, now is the perfect time to sit down and do that proper articulation of the brand along the 4 parameters that you talked about. Really trying to bring those things together. And the third thing then is to connect it to that current mindset. So as I said, if you know that voice and you're thinking about that person and you're thinking about who you are and you're thinking about what their situation or their mood is, then if you think about it like that, it will be easy to know how to make that connection and build resilience. So that's the emotional side of branding. That hard sell, what I would say is this is not the time to be going out with any kind of normal deals or anything like that. But what you want to do is have something that builds a commitment. So if it's kind of, look, again, taking it into that seduction, if it's kind of, could we go out on a date sometime when this is all over? Well, your ideal customer, the person you're trying to seduce, somebody else may have seduced them by then. But if you're trying to get some level of, okay, I know we might have to change it, but what if we committed to going out for, a nice cup of herbal tea next Tuesday? Get some kind of small commitment. So we talked today on the webinar, as you mentioned, I was doing earlier with the World Tourism Association for Culture and Heritage. We talked about the $1 cruise offers. So P&O, cruising has been absolutely devastated by what's happened. P&O have $1 cruise offers, so put down a $1 deposit. Now, if you think about that, that's not a large amount of money. But almost anyone, unless they're so devastated they're unlikely to be traveling after this, can find $1 to put down if they're dreaming about a cruise. So the thing about it is that $1 creates that commitment. It says to you, yes, I'm going to come out on that date with you next Tuesday. On our side, we do have to say, look, if things go wrong, I'm not going to hold you to it. I mean, if it's only $1 deposit, all they've lost is $1. But I think any deals that you make at the moment, given how much publicity there has been about people not getting refunds, you really need to be looking at that and saying, we haven't lost anything if a customer's committed to us now. If we have to postpone or cancel, we can reschedule them. So I'm seeing lots and lots and lots of the deals that are coming out now are saying you can reschedule or cancel up to XY date and it's over a year away. What I would say about that is, again, make that very contextual. So I was actually due to be flying to Venice next week to compete in a race called the Vogalonga, which is a race around the canals of Venice. My flight was cancelled. Obviously, the borders were cut. The flight had to be cancelled. And because I'm in the travel industry, I didn't want to ask for my money back. But initially, until about 3 weeks ago, the airline would not extend me any date beyond December. Well, here's the thing. If you're going in May to Europe, you're probably not going to want to go in early December. And I didn't think I'd be able to go anyway. And even last week, they only delayed until March. Again, if I was going in May, am I going to want to go in March? So I've virtually been forced by the airline to cancel. So that airline has had somebody who really wanted to leave their money with them. And I'm now saying you need to give it back because you haven't let me leave it with you. So
Great.
think about what is your customer's mindset and what is it that they need for you to keep that deal with you, and when is it the right thing to let that money go or let that deal go?
Yeah, buyer seduction that you make, you put them in love, and after that, you need commitment.
Yes.
But by that commitment, it means that try to seduce your customers to pay $1. By that $1, I mean, as cheap as possible. I mean, but that $1 in order to give the commitment and to show that you will be alive after pandemic.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. And it doesn't sound like very much. It doesn't have to be $1, by the way. I mean, I've seen.
No, I just came up as an example. Yeah, I just came up as an example.
Some sort of small commitment, because one of the things we know about humans is what we have is feels three times as valuable to us as what we don't have. And that's true even if the thing that we don't have, if we're asked to swap something we have for something that we don't have, which actually has a higher external or rational value, quite often we won't do it. So that real commitment of that small commitment, building small commitment on the customer side and flexibility on our side, really creates and builds a relationship of trust and commitment that you know that you've got each other's backs.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to tell to my audiences that I'm not that much rigid not to show your questions, because I see here that you're sending your comments and questions to my box, and just send it whenever I see that it's a one that comes into a hand at the right moment. I will ask Caroline. We definitely dedicated a specific time to all of you to share your questions with Caroline. But now I understand that sometimes there are some questions arising in your mind. As I see here, just send it. I'm sure that I will share it with Caroline in order to talk about it. Caroline, we talk about get our customers emotionally connected, provide them with commitment, ask them not to cancel, to postpone, let them see, let them dream about the destinations that we promote in order to bring our products into their wanderlusts. We know that. But I just want to ask this question, to see something unique, to hear something unique, on the basis of the point that I say, what should we be doing differently now?
Well, I think what we should be doing differently now is working through that, how it feels in the mind. I mean, one of the things I definitely think, if you've ever had a crazy marketing idea that in normal times people are going, oh, if we spend on that idea and we don't know it's going to work, we should stick with doing what we've always done, because we know even if it's not perfect, we get something. Now is the time to do that. So now is the time to experiment. That's the first thing I would say. That crazy marketing campaign or that new technique or that new channel that you wanted to try, now is the time to do that. Because in the old days, if nothing happened, people would be able to say, well, it didn't happen and we should have done that. No one's going to know what does or doesn't work in this environment. So if it doesn't work, it could be COVID-19, or if it doesn't work, it could be that it doesn't work. But if it does work, you will have that proof of concept to do it. So I definitely think it's a great time to do that. The second thing I've been saying to people, and you've probably seen this in some of the correspondence that we've had about today, Mohammed, and some of my posts on social, I'm very uncomfortable with the phrase the new normal, because I think we need to live in the new abnormal for the moment. We don't have a new normal yet. McKinsey's talk about the next normal. We are building the new normal right now. So I think what I would say to people is you've got to live with, as human beings, we crave security. It's basic to us. We've got to learn to live with a degree of uncomfort at the moment and be responsive to how fast things are changing. So we've got to embrace the love of change, and we've got to embrace living in that moment of discomfort, because that's going to, now I definitely wouldn't say if you're getting anxious, I would look at ways to deal with and manage anxiety, and think about some of these universal principles of marketing and branding are still going to hold true. So you can hold to those, but you need to be thinking about the idea of living in that discomfort and thinking about what this discomfort means, so that you can spot those opportunities as they come up. Because the world after this is going to look different from the world before. And that's why I don't like the phrase the new normal, because it implies we're already in that world. We're not. Our world is changing every day. We're going to have flare-ups of COVID-19. COVID-19 is mutating. So we don't know what it's going to do. People's economies will be affected in different ways. All of our economies will be devastated. In Australia, interestingly, I think Australia's had a good so far into this, but before this, Australia had 27 years with no economic downturn. So Australians have literally, you'd have to be at the very least in your mid-40s to remember a downturn in Australia. So people have no knowledge of that and no knowledge of what that looks like. Whereas countries that were affected by the global financial crisis, actually, many people I'm sure are going, oh, really, does it have to be us again? But what you do have is a knowledge of surviving and coming through this. So that knowledge and that discomfort will help you find opportunities. Because it's a little bit like when if we're out scanning an environment where we're uncertain physically, or we're in an environment where we're not sure what's coming at us, we're much more alert. Our adrenaline gets flowing, and we are spotting things and looking around us a lot more. So we're paying more attention to looking at those opportunities. So that's what I think we need to embrace and be a little bit more comfortable with change, so that we can create the changes we want to see, because all of you are going to create the new normal or the next normal.
Great.
You're all going to be what it is. Every single one of us is making that new normal now.
The idea that you've shared, that the new normal is not the normal that we had before. It's another kind of normality.
Yes.
Let me share you an idea. This is my personal idea. The only country which suffered least in economical situation by COVID-19 in the world was Iran. You know why?
Why?
We were under sanction for 40 years. After 5 years of communication between 5+1, it was European Union, China, Russia, and America, we came into a framework, and after that 2 years ago, His Excellency President of the United States of America withdrew. And since the previous 9 months ago, we didn't have the permission to sell even oil.
Yes.
And some embarrassing situations happened, like the Ukrainian airline, that you know what I mean, and the other things, and everything was challenging. At the time pandemic happened. Okay, our economy suffered too much. So pandemic just caused the world to be someone like us. And the point is here that what I say, that is story. Carolyn, it's 2 weeks that everything has changed into a new normal that you're talking about. Mm. And by people I mean tourism activists, have been planning for their domestic tourisms for 2 weeks later. Because we will have 3 days off, 3 days holiday, which are one of the most important holidays in Iran because of ending of Ramadan.
Yes.
And all agencies are selling.
Yes. But I think that, as you say, that adversity has trained people for what has happened. And,
exactly.
And the other country that I think similarly has done quite well is Greece, I think, who, of course, their economy almost collapsed after the 2008 financial crisis. So I think in some ways, I appreciate for many people on the ground, it won't feel like that. As I say, you will feel exhausted, but what you will have is the strength that you got through that, and the fact that you have found a way to find that normality and connect to that. So domestic tourism, I actually am very excited about, for every single country, for Iran, for Australia, for New Zealand, for the USA. I'm very excited about the possibilities of us recognizing how wonderful all our homelands are, and stop feeling that it's glamorous to go overseas, but suddenly realize the glamour of what's so close to us.
Yeah.
And I think some of that, again, we're talking about this idea of seduction. It's like when you've been married for a long time, but suddenly at this moment, you're suddenly realizing that how beautiful and how wonderful your husband or wife is. And I think that's what we need to do with domestic tourism, is to realize, remember the glamour of why we fell in love with that the first time, that familiar is now going to look unfamiliar, because we're seeing it through the eyes of a world where that was no longer just the easy option. The easy option, or the only option, was to stay home. So now I can see that people will be out and appreciating that. And I think the uncertainty also makes us turn to that familiarity and celebrate that familiarity. So we will be celebrating what it is about who we are. And that, I think, is going to be, it's funny, I think people take domestic tourism for granted. Of every $100 that is spent in Australia on tourism, or is generated by tourism, 78 of those dollars are by domestic tourists. But the numbers that we all announce or we get excited about are the international visitors. And again, it's that I think we will take those domestic tourists less for granted now. We will remember why we loved them.
Yeah, another, yeah, there is a questions which, let me share it. It is, but domestic tourism is also locked for unknown time. Even, you're right.
Yes. It will be, but it will be the first travel that we're allowed to do. So if we're dreaming, and by the time anything opens up, we will be grateful to get that. So what I see is a situation of the nanocation, the day trip will come first. Then there will be the short trip, the mini break, or sometimes even a staycation. One of the things that I think is the most fun thing to do is to be a tourist in your hometown. And you will look at it with fresh eyes when you do that. So at the moment you can't, but I think that's where people, as you said, Mohammed, travel agents are already taking bookings for domestic travel. So when we look at that and say, well, we won't be able to go now, but the moment lockdown is lifted, people are going to be out on the roads and traveling.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
That's where they're going to start. So that's where the fish are. And that's where the first fish are going to be the closest to home. And it's almost like a series of concentric circles where we build out. Or if you like to think of it, if you throw a stone in the pond, the first waves will be the closest waves. And we will see that.
That's great. Okay. About how to find the time to market, you've come up with answers. But now I just want to ask you, how should operators and agents do marketing? This question comes in that way. We know that we are facing a new normal. Just think about it. 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, 1 month later, everything comes back to the new normal. But people's wanderlust, people's wishes, people's ideas, and their fears totally changed.
Yes.
How should operators and agents do marketing?
Well, I think when we talk about doing marketing, Mohammed, that one is that message, and that's where I think what we should be doing and preparing to do as we come back into recovery is very much around that. What is that tone of voice? How do I speak to them? What are the messages that I should be giving them as we come back? So really thinking about how that sense of who you are, who I am, how do we talk to each other in this situation? So that's kind of it. And as I say, the other side of it is the actual channels that we go through. That's really not going to change that much, in the sense that where people go for information. So the first thing I would say is almost everyone in the world starts with search. So that hasn't changed, and it's not going to change. And if anything, it's probably going to get stronger, because as we're uncertain, we'll be seeking more and more information. And all of us, Google knows more about me than I think my husband does, because I tell it things that I don't tell him. And by typing in, so or voice, increasingly we'll be talking to Google, and at some point I think we'll actually just connect our brains to Google and search. So search is going to be more important, and making sure, again, this is why your brand is so important, because in every single algorithm update that Google has done, brand has got to be more important, and the authenticity of that, and the fact that you are going to give the customer what they're looking for, is Google is using its chatbots, it's training its chatbots to say, this is a brand that is consistent, and this is a brand that I therefore can trust to put in front of my customer, who is the searcher. So search is, I'm going to say, is not going away. It's going to get more and more important. You need to be optimized. Increasingly, we may not want to be touching things, so that trend towards voice search. So I'm no longer, I talk about typing. We're already into the world where I won't do that. I might be saying, Google, where is it safe for me to go if I'm allowed to go overseas? Who is going to open up first? So being ready to have messages around that. And you can, Google actually has terms, or local search engines that you may have locally. They will all have tools where you can find out what are the terms that people are searching for in your category. So make sure that you're finding your own authentic voice, but looking at that and saying, okay, those are the things people are looking for. Which of those messages is one that I can talk to, and make sure that you're putting out content. So again, marketing to create desire, that's 60% about that longer. Things like longer form content, whether that's kind of narrative videos, or whether it's kind of a blog piece, or can you produce a little white paper, a little document that's, 10 ways to travel right now and travel safely, or the places that we have checked out for you that you can go to that have met a certain seal of approval, or who's got great processes on this, who's undergone new hygiene protocol training, which hotels have undergone that, who's passed that mark, all of those kinds of things. Being useful is one of the most important things we can do for customers. So ask yourself the question, how can we be useful to our customers? What are they trying to do at any given point? And therefore, how can I be useful in making that decision? It actually, being useful ranks slightly above being inspiring in terms of what creates a meaningful connection with the brand.
Great,
because
great. Let me talk directly with my audiences, because before an hour the Instagram will automatically end our call, and by that I miss all your questions and comments. I try to share some, because it's not the time to dedicate to you, but your questions sometimes comes here very fruitful, and I'm not gonna miss it. But before the questions, I just want to share the message to you, Caroline, and after that, read the message, then I will go for the questions to see what will happen. This is the message.
Oh, who is that? Oh, Jed.
This is good. Great info as ever.
Yes, this is a great tip. Make sure you have members of your fan club in any of the marketing you do, and get your advocates to do all the hard lifting for you.
Yeah, but there is a top questions from Ahmed. He asked us. He goes into such a brilliant word, which talks about strategy. Yes. I just read the questions, Caroline. The questions is here that, what will be the new strategy for travel agents in new normal situation, and how we should target? Come on.
Okay, well, I think you remember that date I told you, Mohammed, in 1988 when I started working in travel and tourism?
Yeah.
That some of the older people on this mess call, because older people are getting onto Instagram, may remember something called a fax machine. And when I came into travel, fax machines were going to replace travel agents. And here we are now, what, 30 odd years on, and we don't have as many travel agents, but we have better travel agents, I think, because the strategy is around embracing the fact that we are a trusted intermediary. And actually, there's lots of examples from previous crises. I'm sure many travel agents and actually airlines on the call can remember when the volcano in Iceland basically shut down Europe. One of the things that consumers discovered at that point is if you book through an online site overseas because it's cheap, there is nowhere to go to get your money. Whereas if you have a local travel agent, then you have a point of connection and someone who knows how to get that, who knows who to ask, who knows what to do for you. You may have cost you a little bit more, but that resource is there. Now, local travel I organize myself, or straight point-to-point trips I organize myself. I actually have a travel agent for my more complicated trips, even though I work in tourism, because I know that I could not find the deals and the experience they have. So I think it's really about us finding a collective voice as an industry, having a strategy about demonstrating why we are so vital to people at this time of uncertainty and what we can do. I think the other thing on that is thinking again. So I'm going to use my travel agents. I don't think they're on the call. Emma Whiting in Melbourne. So she's actually 1,000 kilometers from me, but she's such a good travel agent that I use her. They really have trained, their strategy has been around creating topic experts. So they are very strategic they don't just send people on fam trips. They have someone who is specializing in South America or is specializing in solar. So I think the strategy is going to be about 1 to 2 to 3 specializations. 2 years ago, we would all have been saying have only one, but I think we've demonstrated that the advantage of having a couple, 2 or 3 areas of very specific specialization is if one of those falls over, you've got other deployment that you can use. So think about what are the niches or the ways of looking at this that you can do things. So one of the trends that we've seen globally, now I think in a country like Iran, multi-generational travel is nothing new, but certainly for Western countries, we've seen the idea of multi-generational travel growing. So can you be the person who is brilliant at bringing a whole family together? Can you be somebody who specializes in the really, really crazy requests? So finding those specializations as an individual travel agent, but as an industry, I think travel agents, we need to be talking about and demonstrating and living how that was there. And how you should target is who is it who has realized that that's the case. So firstly, never underestimate the value of a loyal customer. That old metric about it costing, 7 to 10 times as much to target an old customer. So cultivate and look after and really, really protect your existing customer base. And that's through having conversations, that's picking up the phone. It can be really nice letters. Can there be little things that you can do for us? Is there something that you can actually just send a little wave out, or is there, can you tell stories about helping somebody specific? So one of your customers has a little bit of a problem. Can you help them out and then share that story with other people? So I think really doing some of those things can actually really help you as a travel agent, because that idea of local and really aim to be the expert on, both the neighborhoods that you're selling, but also the neighborhood that you're in. So, know your other local businesses and share with your other local businesses about what you're up to. So, don't be afraid to celebrate the fact that you are an expert at both ends of the route. You're an expert in being local and you're an expert in the place you're sending people to.
Yeah, Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I also appreciate Ahmed for such a questions as he raised it, and we really enjoyed it. You know that our next topic is somehow about the new trends, Carolyn. As we talked about influencing or being influencers, nowadays it's become a kind of trend in the world. And I didn't know that we can take it as a kind of promotional activity, we can take it as a kind of marketing, or does it help our brand or not? But I think it's become a trend in the world nowadays. Most of the companies have created their brand image. Most of the companies have tried to show what they have to sell their products, but they think that they need influencers to help them. But I'm just going to come.
Go on, finish,
Yeah,
Mohammed, please.
yeah, but I'm just going to come into a new policy. Before going to that policy, is that we talk about bloggers, we talked about photographers, we talk about community builders, we talk about influencers. Sometimes we think about influencers are the ones who are not bloggers. Sometimes we say that all of them are influencers. Sometimes we take that a person who creates a community is a person who brings all influencers into a community, so that person is a community builder.
Yes.
Caroline, I'm not gonna have your answer now because it is the prior notice of Instagram that we're just gonna put an end to the first hour. But yeah, just tell me if whatever you were saying, because we have 2 minutes.
Well, maybe I think the issue with influencers is we get very hung up on the definitions of influencers. What you have to think is, who is a good intermediary for you with your customers? And who is it that you can afford to have? Because not all influencers, I was talking about this, and Jed, if he's still on the call, will be laughing because this is absolutely the truth. In the UK, in Australia, New Zealand, USA, one of the most powerful influencer audiences is the organizer of the local mums Facebook group. And that's probably the most cost-effective influencer. Those small local networks can actually, particularly if you're a travel agent, we were talking about travel agents now, those smaller audiences can often be much more cost-effective than, having a Kylie Jenner or something. Now, influencers haven't had a good COVID-19. Many of them, the ones that we think of as the big name influencers, they've often seemed very self-absorbed, whatever. But I think if we step back and say, are there people out there who, if we talk to them, if we bring them in and help them share our brand, will be persuasive, but will respect our brand? If you think of influencers like that, those are the influencers who are never going to be more important than now.
That's great. That's great. So I should say sorry because I have to automatically end our live talk now, but after 40 to 50 seconds, we will come back because let Caroline to have a glass of water, or also the audiences to take a cup of tea or a glass of waters. In 30 seconds or 40 seconds, we will come back for the second session of the episode of Live Talk with Carolyn Childs. This is a great honor to have you here, Caroline, and we are willing for the second session of the episode. Thank you.
I'm ready and waiting.